Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm wrapping up all the books that I read in June, which was an interesting reading month for me actually, because I read very few physical books, which is unusual for me. I really was thriving with audiobooks and ebooks this month. I also had a higher average rating this month than I did last month, so for June it was a 4.0, and for May it had been a 3.86, so I rated things a little higher, but I found that a lot of the books that I read are actually not very memorable. I don't remember a lot about what I read in June, so that was kind of interesting that I rated them better, but I actually remember a lot less of them. But let's just dive in with the books because I have several to talk about here. I was participating in Whatever-thon. I was on the Sunset Scholars team, and I had pledged 8 books, and I did barely manage to hit that goal. I kind of scraped through with one more book on the last day of the readathon, so I do have 8 books to talk about today. The first thing I read this month was A Woman in the World by Rebecca Gilman, which is it's an audiobook that's technically a recording of a stage performance of a short play that Rebecca Gilman wrote about Mabel Loomis Todd, who is Emily Dickinson's first editor. And this is a weird one because it's about Emily Dickinson, but only tangentially, because it's really about Mabel Loomis Todd and the kind of mythology that she's written about herself. And the whole thing is basically a monologue from Mabel's point of view. And Mabel, I don't know how well it correlates to the real person, but Mabel in this stage play is a really unpleasant person. She's like intentionally insulting and embarrassing her daughter. She's talking about like very personal things in front of a public audience that are making people uncomfortable. Yeah, she's just kind of deeply unpleasant and has clearly written this mythology around herself that makes her feel important. And so it's her telling about how she became involved with the Dickinson family, how she met them, what her relationship with the different members of the family was like. But it's all clearly like skewed in her favor, and you get this very clear like sense of bias as she's talking. And as the story goes on, you see that she starts to kind of realize what she sounds like, and she starts to kind of break down near the end, not really like fully break down, but kind of reveal more of the actual truth of the matter at the end. But it was interesting. I don't know much about Mabel Loomis Todd, so I don't know how accurate everything in it was. But it was just kind of not very pleasant to listen to. Like, I listened to it, it was interesting, it was fine, but I really did not enjoy listening to this like very narcissistic woman talking about how she'd been this great friend to Emily Dickinson and all these things, but like she's having an affair with Emily's brother for like 10 years or something, and she didn't even really know Emily Dickinson. So there's a lot of stuff like that in there where it's very clear that it's like biased, and I know that like that's the point of the stage play, is her presenting herself in this specific way and then kind of coming to terms with the reality of things throughout the story. But it just was really not pleasant to listen to. I think I rated it 3 stars, and it's not the lowest rated book that I read this month, but I think it is the one I enjoyed the least. After that, I did start reading stuff that I did enjoy, and this would account for my having a pretty high average rating for the month. But the next thing I read was 7 of Infinities by Alec de Bedard, which is a retelling of the Arsène Lupin stories, which, if you're unfamiliar, it's a French series about a gentleman thief. And so this one was really fun. It's not what I expected. I think this one is advertised a lot as being kind of a murder mystery, which it does have a murder mystery in it, but it's focused on like, oh, it's this murder mystery and the characters all have like secrets that they're trying to hide, but I don't think that's really what this book is. So this follows Van, who is a scholar who has an illegal or at least unethical mem plant that she's not supposed to have, which like allows her to access the memories of somebody else, and that's how she's gotten her position as a scholar. And it's also about Sunless Woods, who is a sentient mind ship who is also a notorious thief. Sunless Woods is not her original identity. But it's about the two of them kind of getting to know each other and becoming involved with each other over the course of this murder mystery investigation, because a woman comes to visit Van's student, Uyen, who like leaves the room for a minute, and then when she goes back to speak to this woman, the woman is dead. And so they are trying to prevent Uyen from being arrested for murder that she didn't commit. So they're trying to figure out kind of what happened. And I think the marketing around this book suggested that it was going to be a little more action-packed, a little more mystery-heavy than it really is, whereas a lot of it is more about Van and Sunless Woods and the kind of development of their relationship and the kind of romance that blossoms between them as they're both kind of navigating their own difficult histories and kind of figuring out how much of their past do they keep to themselves and how much do they share. It's much more about that and the way that develops more than it is about the mystery itself, although the mystery does kind of tie into their backstories. So a lot of the investigation actually happens via side characters who are people that Thomas Woods knows, and it's a lot more slow-paced and subdued than I think I was expecting. But I do always enjoy Ali Davidar's writing and the way that she writes her characters, so I did still really enjoy this one, and I would highly recommend it, especially if you would like a nice like sci-fi sapphic romance. I think this is a really good version of that, as long as you go into it with the right expectations. Then after that, I read A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, which I read for my kind of ongoing Goodreads Choice Sci-Fi and Fantasy Nominees project, where I'm reading all the nominees from last year. And this one I really enjoyed as well. I agree with everyone who's ever said before me that this is a fantastic book, that it's a warm hug of a book, that it's just like a really good experience, because it really is. It is, however, another book that I think has some kind of incorrect marketing around it, because the description for the book says that Dex and a robot go on this adventure to ask a bunch of people about what do people need. And that's not really what happens. Dex goes on an adventure themselves, meets a robot named Mosscap, and then continues on the adventure with Mosscap's company. And it's more like philosophical discussions between Dex and Mosscap around like, do you need to have a purpose? Or what is purpose? Or what do you need to have a fulfilling life? So it's much more like a philosophical discussion and kind of a character study of Dex than it is any kind of like adventure, or, you know, they're not really talking to other people throughout the story. That being said, again, this is a very sweet book and I really enjoyed it. I do think it's a really thought-provoking book with all of its questions around like purpose and meaning and things like that. So I do highly recommend this one. I just was caught off guard because it wasn't at all what I was expecting it to be. But I did think I was going to like it because my partner just read it before I did, and he'd really loved it, and he'd actually picked it for me to read. So really enjoyed it, and I am glad that I picked it up. I'm kind of sad it took me so long to get to it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the sequel, which I think comes out, it's the 6th of July right now, so I think it comes out like next week or something. After that, I read The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik, which was another book for this Goodreads Choice project, and I will link the video up above where I talked more at length about this book and about this series as a whole, because I did read A Deadly Education and The Last Graduate. But this one is the second book in the series, in the Skull and Minute series, and I think it suffers a little bit from second book syndrome or middle book syndrome. It kind of drags a little in the middle. There's a very repetitive section where it's just like, and then they did the obstacle course again. It's a lot of that. I also would have liked to see one of the characters get a little more focused, because he does something near the end of the book that I think would have been more impactful if we had had more of him in the story leading up to that. Other than that, though, I did really enjoy this. This is a series that's very much a character study of Elle, the protagonist, as she is trying to build an alliance and ultimately is making friendships and kind of figuring out what her place in the world is going to be, because there's like this prophecy that she doesn't really want any part of, and it's just kind of her kind of coming to terms with who she is and what her abilities are and figuring out how to harness that for good, because that's what she wants to do. And I really enjoyed the way that Elle's journey continued throughout this book. She has kind of an expanding circle of friends. I really liked the way that the status quo changed for her and the ways that altered her characterization as the story went on. I thought that was really well done, and I think the ending of this book is really intense and it's kind of a cruel cliffhanger to leave people on, but luckily the third book comes out later this year, and I am planning to read it as soon as I can get my hands on it, because I do want to see what happens. Then I read The Grief of Stones by Catherine Addison, which is the second of the Cemeteries of Amalo books and the third book overall in the Goblin Emperor world. But the Cemeteries of Amalo series is following Thara Kalahar, who's a witness for the dead, which means that he can basically speak to the dead shortly after they've died and kind of ask them questions. This could be like, who killed you? Or it could be like, where's your will? It could be like, where's that recipe that you saved? Anything like that. He's basically resolving problems for people that arise out of the death of someone that they knew, and in some cases that means just finding something, and in other cases it's solving a murder. So in this second book, there's a little bit of fallout from the first book that he's grappling with, and I don't want to talk about that and spoil that one for you, because I definitely think you should pick these up. But in this one, as he's kind of dealing with all of that, he ends up getting sucked into a mystery surrounding a school for foundling girls and some sketchy activity around that. And so I really enjoyed this as an installment of this series, and I love Kelleher as a detective. He's probably my favorite fictional detective. He's just really well written, and he's very sad. He's a very sad character. His backstory is quite sad, but I think that these books have a uniquely hopeful tone, because the world that this is set in is terrible. It's a horrible place for a lot of people, but a lot of these books, both The Cemeteries of Mallow and also The Goblin Emperor, there are books about people in power and people with authority trying to do the best they can and trying to make the world a better place in any way that they can. And so I think that this was a book that I just kind of like needed at this time, and you know, with everything going on in the world, I think that I liked having that kind of dose of happiness and this idea that people in power can care about the people that rely on them and can actually want to make the world a better place. Because we're not seeing that happen right now, that's for sure. But yeah, I think this was just the book that I needed at the time, and I cannot more highly recommend any of these books, either Cemeteries of Mallow or The Goblin Emperor, because they're all fantastic. And I do, again, just really like Kelleher as a character. And then I continued my trend of queer detectives. I can't remember if I said this. Kelleher is queer. That's a part of his backstory. It's an important part of his backstory, actually. But I started this trend with that one that continued on with the next book of reading books about queer detectives, because then I read Of Charms, Ghosts, and Grievances by Ali de Bodard. This was her newest novella. This is following Tuon and Asmodeus, who are a married couple from her Dominion of the Fallen series, and this is their like spin-off mystery series. And so it's about the two of them trying to solve a murder mystery, take care of a ghost, and also babysit their nieces. And I just really enjoyed the way that this mystery unraveled across the course of the story. And I really liked the way that everything that was happening in the mystery and everything that was happening with the babysitting was kind of underscoring some of the conflict within Tuon and Asmodeus' marriage. And it was kind of pushing them to deal with some emotional things that they had not been willing to deal with. And I liked the way that their relationship developed as we got to the close of the story. Plus the mystery in here was just really interesting and fun, and I think kind of almost kind of realistic and believable. It was a really interesting mystery in terms of like the whodunit part of it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I am hoping that there are going to be more of these Dragons and Blades books, because I really like them and they're really fun, just like brief mystery stories that you can read in like one sitting. They're just a lot of fun, and I'm hoping that there's going to be some more of them. Then the penultimate book that I read continued my trend of queer detectives, and this was Changing Faces by Cole McCade, which is the 4th book in the Criminal Intention series, which is one of my favorite series I'm currently reading. It's very much like Criminal Minds, but if it was a book series instead of a TV show. So each book has like its own mystery, and then there's like an overarching plot that kind of develops over the course of the books. This one has also got a romantic suspense element with a romance forming between the two main detectives involved. So I've been really enjoying this series, and this continued that trend. Changing Faces was really good. This one has a much more kind of cut and dry mystery. It's very clear what happens. Actually, you're told what happens in like the first chapter. So you kind of know what to expect. And in this case, it's not so much about whether they figure out who did the murder, but about what's the right thing to do in the wake of this murder. So a lot of this book is about Song-jae, one of the two main detectives, having to grapple with the idea that maybe the law isn't always justice. So I thought that was really interesting. I liked the way his relationship with Malcolm developed over the course of the book. I liked the new character that got added as well. There's a new character who's shown up, who's been alluded to before, but this is her first time actually showing up on page. So I really enjoyed getting her perspective in the book, or not really perspective, she's not a POV character, but like the way that she interacts with Malcolm sheds a really interesting perspective on his relationship with Song-jae. I thought that was really well done, and I'm really looking forward to reading more in this series, because some big stuff happened right at the very end of this book, and I really need to know what happens next, especially for Song-jae and his backstory. And the last thing that I read was actually my lowest rated book of the month. This was The Foxhole Court by Nora Sakovic. This is my lowest rated book, but not my least favorite, because my least favorite was definitely A Woman of the World. But this one, The Foxhole Court, follows a guy named Neil Johnston, who signs to join the Palmetto State University Exie team, which is a fictional sport. It's like a mix of lacrosse and ice hockey and soccer. And so Neil joins this team, and this is a bad plan because Neil is also on the run. That's not his real identity. His father is a notorious crime lord called the Butcher of Baltimore, and Neil has been on the run for like 10 years or something, or 8 years, and he ends up signing with this Exie team, which is a terrible plan because it puts him in a public spotlight, but Exie is like his favorite thing in the world, and so he really wants to be on the team. This is a bizarre book. It is so strange. Like, just the premise there that you have a guy signing up for a fictional sport, but also his dad is a notorious crime lord. Like, that's where it starts, and it only gets weirder from there. But I enjoyed this in the sense that, like, it's a train wreck. None of the representation of the book is good. It's very much a book where you read it and you go, this author didn't so much as Google any of the stuff she was writing about, but she wrote it anyway. And it's like a train wreck that you can't look away from. And I think Books and Lala said it best in her review for this book, so I'm gonna like put that somewhere on screen because it made me laugh and it was exactly like how I felt about this. She wrote, 2 stars, this is terrible, I must read more. And that's very much what the vibe of the series is. Like, it's not good. It's just bizarre. The pacing is strange because a lot of it's very slow, and then there's like a ton of action right at the very end. The characters are all very strange. There's some very dubious mental health rep in this book. There's just a lot of weirdness in the relationships between the characters, and the plot just gets more and more bonkers as the book goes on. And I got to the end and was like, I didn't enjoy this, but I did enjoy this, and I want to read the rest. So I guess I'm going to be reading the rest of the series because I need to know what happens next. But this was just a strange book, and I did give it 2 stars, but I'm still going to read the rest because it had not quite a cliffhanger. It has kind of a cliffhanger. Yeah. Weird book. One that I don't quite know how to describe because it is that strange. But yeah, it's a good time if you just want something that you can like totally turn your brain off and just go, you know what, nothing matters. Suspension of disbelief is like, there's nothing here to believe. None of it is realistic, and I don't think it's intended to be. So yeah, fun if you just want something to like turn your brain off and read. But those are all the books that I read in June. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.